We discussed basics of the GPS, right? And then we did discuss something like multilateration and geometric dilution of precision that tells us how accurate how the accuracy of the localization will depend on the location of the anchors. And we also sort of understood that it is pretty sensitive to the range measurements, right? And what we will do today is we are going to kind of look at more detailed version of the ranging process, right? How does two devices range among each other, right? And in particular, this will be using like a wireless modality, like a radio, right? So using RF, how can you range two IoT devices among each other? Right, so that will be the pretty much the focus of today's class, and I'll try to finish this ranging part, right? Even if it exceeds 5 or 10 minutes beyond what we have within the scheduled time of the class, we'll see how much we can do. Okay, so last class we sort of understood that ranging is fundamental, and the device that we want to range collects or ranges with several other anchors who also advertise their coordinates or their positions, right, in the reference frame that we are considering. Okay, and within the same reference frame, we are trying to calculate the distance of those anchors or beacons, whatever we call, from our device, right? So if this is our IoT device, we are interested in knowing the distance between this device and the anchors. And apart from that, we are also getting into or we require the information regarding the anchors coordinates, right? So if you see on the right hand side, the localization takes into account these two things, right? So, and that is the naive version of the multilateration that we looked at. Okay. And we are specifically going to see that how these things are computed or estimated in using wireless radios. Okay, so to solve for the location, we introduced the range equations. If you remember from the last class, that if there was no noise and the ranges were perfectly calculated, we could have simply solved the system of equations, the quadratic equations that we wrote up while trying to solve the equations for GPS, and try to solve them, right? Those are the range equations. But it might happen that the ranges are not quite perfect, right? So on the left hand side, I show an example where D is the device, right? So D is the device, and A, B, and C are the anchor points. And on the right hand side, it is the same thing, just that the ranges that we have calculated from the anchors are quite noisy, right? So this is not going to give you an unique solution. Yeah, so if we write our range equations like this, right, the way this is in 2D, so we are just using these three anchor positions, and our location is just 2D tuple x and y, right? So if let's say xi is the location of the x coordinate of one such anchor, right, the ith anchor. So and then this is our location, or the location of the device, right? And then we knew that so this plus yi minus y whole square, right, and to the power half. So this is the Euclidean distance. So this was basically supposed to be equal to ri, right? Which is not going to be the case if you have a noise mixed up, right? So in this case, this is not going to be exactly equal, but this will be equal to some kind of ri plus some error or noise that we can call like an epsilon. Okay, so and you have let's say 3 or 4 or more of this, so I could be equal to 1 2. So in this case 3, but you can have more and more anchor locations, right? So more number of anchors you have, better is the accuracy of your localization. Okay, so how do you think we can solve this, right, as an optimization problem? Anybody can go ahead and tell me. It's a sort of, we are trying to solve for x and y. Okay, and the rest of the things are known. So this is an unknown and this is another unknown. How do you think we can solve this thing? Okay, is there any particular metric that we try to minimize? Okay, so I'm not hearing any answer. So I'll try to. So this is any optimization problem, right? When we try to solve, we are trying to see that we are trying to get those values of x and y which closely resembles r, right? So this is something that has to be minimized for all the system of equations, okay, so that we can minimize the amount of error that is introduced. Okay, so one option is we can write it up like this, right, where uh, we assume that the k beacons are at positions xi and yi, and the node 0, right, wherever our IoT device is located, is at x0 comma y0, right? That is what I have written as xy in the previous slide. And the distance measurements between node 0 and the beacon I is ri. So whatever is the error is epsilon or fi, right, is the cost function here is ri minus the analytical distance in between the device and the anchors. Okay, so all we try to do is minimize the function of sigma fi square, right, right, because we want to get the absolute value. We don't because ri could sometimes be greater than or lesser than. That's the reason we have taken a square, right? Or you can even sum up the absolute values. And then while doing this, we want to get the values of the x0 and y0 that will do the minimization. Okay, so this is basically arg min of sigma fi square subject to the values of x0 and y0. Okay, so this will be a nonlinear optimization problem, as you can see, and in many standard toolboxes, right, in MATLAB, you can use this fmincon, or if you're using the SciPy or NumPy, they will have lots of nonlinear optimization problem solving libraries, right? And one of them is LMFit that we used last class, where in the last semester we used this for an homework assignment, right? This is a nice library which is going to give you set of tools to minimize such equations and solve such optimization problems. Okay, so one idea could be we can try to convert it into a linear form, but now I showed you in the last class one way, right? That is one style for solving such equations. The other could be something like this, where we already have this range noise, and what we do is that we try to assign fi as 0, right? Ideally we want the error to be as minimum as possible, so we force the value to be 0, and then square both sides, right? And please note that ri, xi, and yi are all known values, right? These are not really unknowns, right? Although this is an analytical equation we are writing, but ri, xi, and yi are all known. Okay, so once you square both the sides and do this arrangement, right, what we are left with is that equation of the form of like ax plus by is equal to c, right? Because this is a constant, these are all known, right? And 2 into yk minus yi and 2 into xk minus xi, right? This is also constant. How do we get this? We get this by subtracting, let's say, equation 3 from equation 1, or equation 2 from equation 3, right? Because if you have 3 anchors, you are going to have 3 such equations, right? And you can subtract one from the other to get rid of the quadratic terms, right? Because x0 square and y0 square are the only culprits here. So if they get eliminated, then you are just left with linear equation. Okay, so now this is the equation that we have to work with. Okay, so 2 into x, I put it in red color because these are the unknowns, and whatever is in black are already known quantities. Okay, so now this becomes a standard in the, we arrange it in a standard form, and then like basically ax plus b, as you all know, and we already know the values of a and b, right? Because this is the coefficient matrix. We know the coefficients of x, or the unknowns here, where x is represented by this two-dimensional column vector x0 and y0, and b and a are all known. Okay, so the dimensionality of b and a depends on the number of anchors you have. Okay, so if you have more number of anchors, you will basically have a larger matrix, and also it is like the higher probability that is going to get rid of the noise. Okay, because the noise, like every anchor measurement is going to add some kind of noise, but when you solve the equation together, right, that is going to help you in order to remove the noise from the entire system just by having more number of samples here. Okay, so we already have the equation in the form Ax is equal to B, and if you have an exact solution, that is another story, right? That it is much easier to solve it. But in this case, what we happen to have is that because we forced these values to be zero, right? While we tried this rearrangement of the equation, so it has to be somehow solving a form of least squares, right? And for doing that, there is one strategy, and you can look it up, right? You can refer a standard linear algebra textbook, right? Let's say Gilbert Strang. You can see how this matrix equation, right? If it is not exact, you want to sort of do a minimization of least squares. This is a standard way to do this, right? You can very easily write this, right? But why this is done, or what is the reason, I would suggest that you basically try to consult. Okay, so from this only, what is being done, you basically have this A transpose on both sides. Okay, and then you do you take it on the other side. So basically you have to do this A transpose A inverse into A transpose B. Okay, so if you do this, this is equivalent to solving for x using using least squares. Okay, so last class we showed one technique, right, using the Taylor series and solving the set of GPS equations, and this is one more technique. And not only you have to do something like this, you can also use like other optimization tools where you can directly go and try to solve this nonlinear equation. Okay, so there are nonlinear optimization solvers which you can directly try out. Okay, so this is kind of a background of the multilateration that we started on the last day. We showed one technique. Now you are familiar with, like, there are other ways to go ahead with the range equation and solve for the ranges. And now we are going to concentrate on how basically the ranging takes place, right? In particular, wireless ranging, because here we are talking about two IoT devices that have wireless radios installed on top of them, and we are interested in using that communication link as a sensing modality performing ranging. Okay, so ideally, let's say there are two IoT devices that have Wi-Fi installed on them, and we are trying to use the Wi-Fi itself, like a physical layer of our the radio itself, for computing or estimating the range or the distance in between these two devices. So into speed of light. Okay, so what we care about is really time of flight. We want to estimate the value of time of flight, which is the time taken by the packet, like the time taken by the packet or signal to reach from the transmitter to the receiver. We are simply interested in finding out this TOF value. So what could be a naive algorithm to do this, right? Because both TX and RX, both the devices are in our hands, right? We can program them as we like. I can install any hardware on top of them as we like, right? So one idea could be that when we start sending the packet, we record the time of sending, right? We can write that value in the packet. Let's say T send is the timestamp, and send the packet out, right? And on the other hand, whenever the packet is received, we timestamp T receive there, right? Whenever the packet is exactly received, we record the time, and the time of flight is being estimated at as t received minus t sent. T sent was already sent from the retrieved from the packet, so we know the value of t sent, and rho could be simply equal to t received minus t sent, right? So now, what would be a problem with this very simple algorithm we have now?
The clocks may not be synchronized.
Very good. The clocks will not be, yeah, it will not be synchronous. Anything else?
Sir, if there is any delay in the packet delivery, sir.
What do you mean by packet delay here? Can you clarify? So there is no network, by the way. So there is just like TX and RX, and it's a direct line of sight communication.
Okay. Yeah, I'll think and get back, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, there will be one delay, and that delay will be basically some uncertainty that is kind of inserted by the system itself, right? Whenever you ask the kernel or the system to send the packet, it's not going to send it immediately. So there will be some lag that might be there. And same for receiving, right? When you receive, right? Even if you are using a real-time kernel, there are like issues, right? You will not know the exact timestamp when you are sort of receiving the packet. So one is about the synchronization issues, right? This TX and RX do not have a synchronous clock. They are kind of talking with two different references as long as the clock is concerned. And try to compare this with GPS, right? In case of GPS, we had atomic clocks on all the GPS satellites, right? So by default, they are all synchronous, right? We do not have any that much sophistication in these devices, right? So we have to come up with a poor man's technique in order to find out this TOF. So these are the four things, right? It's very much the same as you guys told me. So one is the processing delay between the packet timestamping and actually sending it, right? So there is a small delay, and which is something that is not like very much controllable, right? To the granularity we need. Okay. Same thing on the other side. So there is a processing delay between the receiving packet and the querying time. Whenever you are querying at what exact time the packet has arrived. Then there is this clock offset. There is the synchronization differences in between them, right? So some the clock could be not exactly following the same reference point, right? So T send and T receive, right? We cannot really subtract them like that because we are not aware of the clock offset. Okay. This was very similar in case of our GPS also. And in that case, we had a fourth satellite, and that was being used to encounter the clock drift. Okay. And the fourth point, which is a little bit subtle, right? And where I mentioned is that we are really interested in the exact time when the packet arrived. It is not really the packet has arrived and there is some other process in the system which tells me that the packet has arrived, right? So we cannot tolerate such kind of delays. We have to look at a little bit more fundamental technique about the packet arrival process, right? And how can we get to know the exact packet arrival time? And why I stress on the word exact is that we are talking about what scale are we talking about here? Anybody wants to answer?
Nanoseconds.
Yeah, nanoseconds, or even like I would say in some of the sophisticated radios, you're talking about even like picoseconds or tens of picoseconds, right? Because see, nanosecond is also like almost like a feet, right? And if you are looking at some advanced robotics sort of applications where they are trying to move arms, right? Or they want to make sure that there is no collision in between the arms or the robot and some other interface, right? So you really need something which is sort of reliable up to millimeters, right? Or like a centimeter. So that basically means we need time granularity, which is even like more finer than a nanosecond, right? So it's not something that you have the ability to do a system call, know the time, and then say that okay, I have received the packet. So we are not operating in millisecond or microsecond. Okay, so we are operating nanoseconds and below. So this is extremely sort of a like an important thing to address, right? So this is like purely an engineering challenge, right? And all of these four things are all engineering challenges, because if you just follow the laws of physics, distance is equal to time of flight multiplied by speed of light, and you are done, right? Now how do you engineer the system to get this value of TOF, or estimate the value of TOF, is the headache, right? We have. So for the first two things, we cannot do anything other than like trying to keep the timestamp as close as possible whenever it goes to the NIC card, right? So one option that is done for point one. So this is one of the things that we do for point one, is try to do the timestamping often in the NIC, right? And in very sophisticated radios where like we are very sensitive about the range, is often the packet is like scheduled, right? Instead of sending the packet and knowing the time when it was sent, what is done is they already store some future value of time when the packet is going to leave the radio, right? So in that way, whenever there is a, let's say there is a counter, and you have already preloaded the counter with a value, when the counter expires, immediately there is an interrupt and the packet is sent. So there is like no delay, like just the next clock tick of the system, the packet will be sent. So in that way, we try to bring the time stamping as close as to the NIC card as possible. That is what we can reduce the uncertainty between the processing delay between time stamping the packet and sending it. Okay, and for number two, this kind of systems, right, where we have to have a very deterministic schedule, right? We really need to know that the packet has been sent. I'm expecting a packet, and whenever I receive the packet, I need to timestamp it, right? So there is nothing like carrier sensing, right? In Wi-Fi, for example, you try to do an carrier sensing, and if the carrier is busy, you try to back off, and there are collisions and so on. So there is a shared medium, right? In this case, we cannot handle that much of uncertainty. We already know that the system is very tightly scheduled, and in the entire scheme of things, right, all the nodes that are ranging with each other, they are highly orchestrated, right? I know that node number one at this point of time is going to send a message to node number, let's say 5. So 5 is expecting a message from 1, and everybody else are by the protocol shut down, right? They are not supposed to listen, or they are not supposed to interpret any data, right? That is going to be sort of garbage for them. Okay, so garbage in the sense they are not, those data is not going to be useful for calculating their ranges. Okay, so anybody can listen onto the wireless medium. So here we are not doing the reception based on carrier sensing, rather it's a very tight sort of TDMA kind of a schedule. Okay, so now we are going to look at the fourth thing, right, and put some more time in trying to understand that how can we get a way to know that the packet has arrived. So somebody who has some hands-on experience on driver development, or you have actually worked on a kernel patch, right? So this is a very standard way to get the timestamp values from the time spec data structure, right? In the kernel itself, you will get access to some ancillary data that is associated with every packet. Okay, so and one of them is you can have an access to the timestamp value. Okay, so this is what I was mentioned. Doing such an exercise, right, sometimes becomes unreliable in our case, right? Even in a real-time kernel, there could be other issues where you might not get the exact value of the timestamp when the packet has arrived. Okay, so we cannot simply rely on a software solution. Okay, so the time of flight, we have to know something else, right, which is associated to the phenomenon of reception of a packet. So what happens is let's say there is a wireless packet, right, and that packet is going to be sent from the transmitter to the receiver. Okay, and the time that ideally it should take for moving this distance is this TOF, right? It cannot be lesser than TOF, it cannot be more than TOF, because the speed of light is constant, right? So it can never be less than TOF, first of all, right? If even there is an error, right, the error is always going to be positive. So in many of the simulations, wherever you try to construct such or emulate such systems, right, often you try to, let's say, add a Gaussian noise, right? Please note that you cannot really have an error which is less than TOF. It is never going to happen in reality. Okay, so whatever value of TOF you will get is going to be greater than the actual value that will happen. So it's a positive bias. Okay, so now on the receiver side, right, whenever you happen to receive the packet, okay, you will see something which is known as the channel impulse response. So don't get scared by the name if you have not heard about it. So this is simply when you create some kind of a disturbance, right? Let's say this transmitter, whenever it is putting the packet in the medium, it's, let's say, creating a disturbance. It's creating a some sort of a power spike in the medium. Okay, and that phenomenon will be reflected after some time, right? So this is going to be reflected after some finite amount of time in the receiver side. Okay, so and that power will be received, like it is going to interpret some value of power, and it is from that point it is going to understand that some packet has arrived. Okay, so we will look at more examples what happens in case of obstacles and other sort of reflecting bodies present. So this plot, right, where we have this time on the x-axis, and this time is extremely granular. Okay, so this could be in picoseconds or nanoseconds and so on. So the receiver has access to this channel impulse response, and we are just going to look at the amplitude of the received signal, right? You are going to receive not only just one signal, but you will see a collection of such signals, which is basically a phenomenon that happens because of other obstacles in the environment. Okay, so let's say you have obstacles like this. So what will happen? Let's say you will have one of these spikes that is going to happen because you have the direct line of sight with the receiver. So this is the signal that comes or reaches the receiver first, right? And then you will have other like delayed copies. Okay, so this is also something that is going to reach the receiver, and after a few nanoseconds or after a few picoseconds, you are also going to see a spike like this in the receiver side. Okay, and let's say that there is one more path which is like much more longer, right? So longer is the path, you will have a more delayed value of the signal that is being showing up in the receiver side, right? And like this, you will have, like in theory, you will have infinite number of obstacles, and you'll have many such things, and until it fades away, right? So longer is the size of the path, it is going to lose power, and slowly you are going to see something which is almost close to noise. Okay, so theoretically speaking, whatever is the first peak, right, is going to be your time of flight, because there should not be anything more powerful or like more in terms of amplitude than this. Okay, and it should be the first one. Okay, and for given this particular packet, there should not be any other signal which is reaching the receiver first other than the direct line of sight. Okay, so this is the straight line distance. So the straight line distance, which is going to give you the TOF. Okay, So now let's see what happens if you have something like this. Okay, so instead of your direct line of sight that you had, now you have this, right, where the signal is going to let's say go through the obstacle, right? So radio frequencies do have the ability to penetrate certain obstacles, and it is going to be attenuated, right? The power value it is going to be showing up at the receiver will be much lesser than what we had earlier. So what will happen in this case? It will be something like this, and of course in terms of time it is going to reach the other side earlier, right? However, the value of the power, the amplitude of that particular component will be much lesser compared to the other ones, right? In this case, let's say this becomes the component that has the highest amplitude. Okay, so just by the fact that the highest amplitude normally are kind of the first peak, right, where we have relatively high amplitude becomes the direct line of sight component is not always true, right? It could be that the direct line of sight is actually blocked, right? So this is a phenomenon which is known as non-line of sight, okay, NLOS, right? And in the last slide, what we showed is direct line of sight, which is LOS condition. And in LOS condition, you do not have any direct attenuation. There is no confusion. So the fast component is the highest component, and so on. So in this case, if you are, I'm going to show you how an actual channel impulse response looks like, right? In that case, you will see that there are many other associated components here and there. So normally our task is to figure out the first prominent component, right, which is often the direct line of sight or something extremely close by. Okay, so that we have the TOF almost correct. Okay. Now this is just for the theoretical interest, right? What exactly is the channel impulse response, or how does it look like? So this is the standard notation that are used for the signal, right? And we have looked at all of these things while looking at Fourier domain transforms, spectrograms, and so on, where rho n is the amplitude, and this is the complex notation, right? We have learned about this complex notation earlier using just the Euler notations, and this is the complex representation of the signal. And this, when transmitted, and on the receiver side we receive delayed copies. We receive the line of sight copy. This is basically indicated by rho 0 e to the power j phi 0, right? So this is the copy that is received directly, and we are actually trying to figure out this thing tau 0. But at the same time, you will also have the series of delayed copies, okay, for some finite amount of time, right? We are not talking about an infinite time. Let's say there is a finite amount of time, and within this finite amount of time, you will see these delayed copies, or you can, like in you can use this term called echo, right? In case of sound, once you make a sound, you first hear that, and then after that, with like different periods of time, you will hear a lot of echoes, right? If you go to a big cave and you just clap your hand, you immediately hear the sound of clapping, right? You yourself is clapping, that sound you hear, and after that you will hear multiple copies coming around for a finite amount of time, and after that it dies down. You don't hear after, let's say 2 seconds or 3 seconds, okay, depending on the position of the different obstacles. Okay, so this is the same case here. This is just that it's not a sound echo, but it's an echo that is made by radio waves. So that is the reason the resolution or the granularity that we are talking about is much finer in order to make something useful. In this case, we are trying to talk about, or trying to measure the distance in between two radios, right, which are in meters, or these are definitely not in kilometers, right? These are in like few meters could be, right? And with a precision of, let's say, centimeters or millimeters based on the requirements of the application. Okay, so this is some background, right? So you can actually teach an entire class on channel impulse response, or CIR, right? This is a short form, we refer to this thing, but it's just a phenomenon that you have to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, so and within the CIR, we are basically trying to discover which one is the line of sight path, right? So all of these individual copies refer to a path taken by the signal. Okay, so these are different paths taken by the signal, and we are interested in the shortest path. Okay, so shortest path itself is the straight line. You cannot have anything else, right? And the shortest path is also going to be the quickest path. Okay, and also if you do not have like line of sight blockages, it is also going to be the strongest path. Okay, so we will have, our intention is to basically try to look at these parameters and figure out of these components which one is our line of sight path. Okay, and in reality the CIR will look something like this, not really whatever we have seen there, right? It is going to be filled with noise, and you do not know where exactly your line of sight path is, right? If you say this is the strongest component, right, but you have like something else which could be simply noise, or it could be signals which are emitted in the interference, right? It could be emitted from something else, right? These are all registered in the radio, right? If it is operating in the same frequency band and so on, right? So, or you can say that okay, maybe the direct line of sight path was there was some obstacle, so this is more stronger, so maybe this or this could be the ones, right? So there is always a scope of this confusion in trying to identify which one is your direct line of sight path, right? So let's say 1 versus 2, right? Which one should we choose? So this is again an open problem, right? And there are lots of researchers that are trying to identify the path that is corresponding to the shortest path or the direct line of sight path, right? Even if there is an obstacle, what is the shortest path or what is the distance? So this is an active thing, right? Depending on the kind of radio that we are working with, or the power levels and all. So this is something where we do not have a ready-made solution, but we are going to try our best, right? So if there are even multiple things like this, the small thing could be the fast path, and that this is like, let's say, highly attenuated. Like let's say this is highly attenuated, right, where the power is cut down by a lot of by a huge factor, right? And then there are other paths which are relatively sort of have more power value or higher amplitude, and you can very easily mistake them to be the fast path, which is not the case, right? So all sorts of these kind of things can happen. Okay, and one more thing that this CIR can tell you, right, is the nature of the obstacle that you have in the room, right? If your room is very clean, there are like not much obstacles present in between the receiver and the transmitter, you should see something which is much more cleaner, right? Whereas if you see so many paths of the signal, like so many like significantly different paths of the signal, you can conclude that there are definitely many obstacles which are present. And not only that, right, you also know the offset in terms of time, what was the delay, right? So there is a time offset or a delay, right? And this delay sort of tells you the path length, right? What was the length of the path taken by the signal for this particular spike, same for the other ones, which can give you some indication to reverse engineer the layout of the room, right? That is a big leap of faith, but that is something that people are able to do at to some extent. Okay, so at least they can give you some intelligence about, okay, maybe there is a wall in this location. Okay, at least as much as this much granularity they can tell you. Okay, they cannot really go into super fine details, but they can give you some intelligence about the presence of the obstacles and where they are, right? Because you can actually look at the delay and find out what was the length of the path traveled by the signal, and then you can do a geometric analysis to figure out the location of the different obstacles, right? So this is like this, right? So or the example I have showed you earlier, right? So if I give you these values, right, let's say this is L1 and this is L2, right? So somehow you have a way to figure out L1 plus L2, and let's say this is L3 and L4, so you know the value of L3 plus L4, right? So from these values, right, there could be a way to make a guess about the location of these walls. Okay, so that is what I tried to tell you guys. Okay. So one more question is that how do you want to, so we basically, as you understood, that we want to make this things as granular as possible, right? Otherwise it will be difficult to distinguish these different peaks. Okay, and different peaks refer to different paths, as you have understood already. Okay, so what is a good way, right, or what is the characteristic of the signal that we are sending from the receiver to from the transmitter to the receiver? What kind of characteristic should we expect to have, or we want to make sure that the signal has those characteristics in order to clearly distinguish in between these different peaks, right? So if this is like path number 1, let's say some path I, right, and let's say this one is path J, right? So now in this particular example, we are in a position to distinguish in between path I and path J. It could have been that the time resolution is so poor, right? So it could be all merged, right? Path I and path J just simply represent one peak instead of two separate peaks, right? As you see on the right hand side. So this could be like so smooth, or you can have like much more fine-grained time resolution. Okay, so what do you think? What should be the characteristics of the signal that we are sending here that is going to make you the time resolution more granular? So this is a question. If you have some undergraduate background in, let's say, communications, right, or in networking, you study data communication, or you have taken a course on wireless networks, you should be able to have some idea to attempt this. Anybody? It's not something super hi-fi I'm asking. Just that if you have this time granularity very, very fine-grained, right, not coarse-grained like this, what does it mean? You basically have more samples per unit time, no? And which actually means that for a very fine-grained time resolution, you need to use a signal that has a higher bandwidth. Okay, and that's the reason you will find there is a technology called ultra wideband who has a bandwidth of 500 megahertz or even 1 gigahertz, right, for doing this localization or for doing this ranging, which is going to give you ranging accuracy which is like several millimeters, right? Whereas if you want to use, let's say, Wi-Fi in this case, right? So what is the bandwidth of Wi-Fi? Anybody here?
Up to 5 gigahertz.
No, the bandwidth, not the frequency.
Oh, sorry.
What is the bandwidth? Come on, guys. Wi-Fi bandwidth, you should be able to answer. You're taking an IoT class.
800, sir. 802.
802 is the protocol name, right? 802.11. Right? You have all these things in your your
around
phone only.
40 megahertz.
Yeah, 40 megahertz, you have like 20, it starts from 20 in the old days, right? So it's A or B or G or N. Now you are having this AC, right? If you buy a recent laptop, you will see it's all written, right? 802.11 AC, which actually supports till 160 megahertz. Okay, and in old days, in this 802.11 A, B, I think you used to have 20 megahertz, right? We do have 20, we have, I think, N, there is some channel aggregation and all. So there is 40 megahertz, there is 80 megahertz, but definitely these are all not gigahertz. Okay, and they operate in 2.4 gigahertz band, right? The spectrum. So this is the width of the signal. So if the signal is operating from the frequency of f1 to f2, what we are talking about is f2 minus f1, right? What is the width of this entire stuff? Okay, so that is the bandwidth, right? I expected this at least from some like E students, right? They should have at least told me what is the bandwidth of your Wi-Fi signal. Okay, so if you, as you understand, right, if you at least have a higher bandwidth, that is going to give you a better time resolution, and you are going to get a nice range. You are going to get a more correct range or a precise range. Why? Because you can distinguish in between these individual time components, right? So these are the individual paths, and what we are getting here is, you can call a path profile, you can call a multi-path profile, right? You can call it like the channel impulse response, the way we already refer it to, right? So what is the open problem here? The open problem here is to figure out which one is the first guy, which one is the line of sight path that I should consider, right? And if you make a false decision or a wrong decision here, of course your ranging accuracy is going to suffer. Okay, and this is something, this information, right, or this CIR, it's actually available, right? There are, like, for example, if you buy this device called Node MCU, right, they already export, they have a facility to export the CIR, or this Intel chips, right? That most of the Dell laptops used to have this Intel 5300, right? This is one of the Intel Wi-Fi chipsets, and you have in the Linux kernel, you can use a sort of driver that is already public in order to get out these values, right? And then try to do ranging on your own. So these are like lots of open source tools, hardware are available, right, in order for you to actually look at this data and try to appreciate this ranging process. Okay, and you also have UWB that is available, ultra wideband, and these are all off the shelf things that you can buy from the market and experiment and actually look at the CIR, right, and try to see that how the range is computed. If you bring an obstacle very near to the link, you will see there is another path, right? Suppose you have one radio here, this is the transmitter, one radio here, receiver, right, and you have a CI, like a communication going on, right? And if you bring a big metal plate, immediately you will see another spike in the CIR, because the metal plate is also going to act as a reflector, and you can very easily sense the presence of the reflector in your channel impulse response. So this is a very nice modality for doing a lot of sensing tasks using radio waves, right? And this is like pervasively present in any IoT devices these days, right? If you have just a Wi-Fi link or a UWB link, you can double use that particular link, not only for communication but also for such sensing purposes, right? Instead of this metal plate, some human being can come, okay, and it is going to register something in the CIR data, and immediately you can see that it starts behaving as a proximity sensor, right? Because as a human being, you are also going to reflect the radio waves, right? We'll start this sensing modality is going to also behave as a proximity detector, okay? And not only that, people have looked at many applications of this. So based on the nature or the amplitude of the different components, you can even try to classify what kind of reflector was it, right? Was it a metal reflector? Was it a human reflector? Was it wood, right? So some kind of material classification also you can do, right? Not to a great extent, but to some extent you can do. Okay, so using a higher sampling rate or higher bandwidth of the signal, it will be more beneficial for us to know the exact packet time arrival. Okay, So now we are only left with one more problem. How do you come up with a cheap or a poor man's way to figure out the clock offset in between the two devices? Okay, so we don't have any atomic clocks. We have to depend on our intelligence or the protocol that we try to develop in order to get the most exact value, or try to remove the dependency of on the clock offsets, right? We have to come up with a protocol in order to do that. Okay, so I'll try to show you one way how it is done, and that gives you pretty much of a accurate range. And this is one of the industry standards. The industry standards are also becoming better and better. But I am basically, whatever I'm going to show you is something that has been adopted by the industry and for some of the earlier generation devices. Okay, so this is completely like a puzzle, right? How do you find out, how do you figure out a protocol that is going to make the ranging process agnostic of the clock offset in between the two devices? Okay, so this is mostly based on exchange of packets in between the transmitter and the receiver, and for this entire exercise we have to keep our eyes open and try to appreciate that what is happening in the timeline, and what are the different components and the timestamps that are going in, right? Because by adding and subtracting those only, we are going to find out the value of the time of flight. Okay, so what we are doing first is rho is, let's say, the time of flight, and we are sending a packet, right? So this was the reason in the beginning we thought that this t send minus t receive is not going to work. And why? Because this is the presence of the clock offset. The two clocks of these two devices are not synced. Okay, so you basically have to handle this clock offset. So t2 minus t1, and then you subtract or add some kind of a clock offset is going to give you rho. Okay, so now let's say you do one more trick. So you do it one-sided, right? Instead of doing it one-sided, you basically send the packet back, right? Whenever the packet has come, you do some basic processing, and at time t3, so t1 the packet was sent, right? And this was the first time it was like received here, right? And you do some small computation processing, prepare another packet, and then send it out at t3, and again you receive the packet. Okay, so in this case I can write this part as like rho is equal to t4 minus t3 plus the delta clock. Okay, so now we can write this rho as t2 minus t1 minus clock offset plus t4 minus t3 plus clock offset divided by 2. Okay, because one of those guys have a positive clock drift, right, or a positive clock offset. So one is ahead and the other one is lagging behind. So the effect is just going to be reversed when I am sending the packet back. Okay, and this looks like a reasonable solution. So we will have rho is equal to t2 minus t1 plus t4 minus t3 divided by 2. So the question is there anything wrong with this solution, or is there any assumption that we are making here by crisscrossing this delta clock? Anybody?
Sir, we assume that
the packets are sent on a same path.
That's fine.
Yes, sir. We assume that the clock delta clock on both sides is going to be equal, sir.
Yes. What is the reason it is not equal? It looks like it should be equal, right?
Yes, sir. But since we are dealing at the nanoseconds, there is every possibility that if the transmitting system and the receiving system can have some additional difference in time stamping the packets.
No, we already discussed how we are trying to timestamp, right? We are directly using the channel impulse response here in order to doing the timestamp. So there is additional thing that you are going in a correct direction, what I am trying to say is that the offset that we have assumed in the first part, right, where it is sending this T1 to T2, might actually change in the second part, because there is something which is extremely fundamental to this embedded systems called clock drift. Okay, so what we are trying to do is that we are trying to assume that this delta clock and this one remains the same, which might not be the case, because clocks always drift, and we are talking about a sender sending this thing, right, sending a packet, and this packet comes to the receiver, and you are doing some kind of processing on the receiver end, and that could very easily take lots, like few microseconds even, right, or even more than that. It could be like hundreds of microseconds, and within that time the clock might actually drift. Okay, so that is the reason we cannot really keep the offset constant. The offset itself changes. Okay, and this can be very easily tested by this kind of a experiment, right? And let's say on x-axis you have this time ticks, right, and you write a simple program where you are increasing the value of count, right? Let's say you take count as some kind of a unsigned long, and you can keep on increasing this count, right, in an infinite loop. So how is this plot going to look like, right? If you for every clock tick, let's say you are incrementing the value of the counter, so ideally it will look something like this. Okay, but if you actually investigate, right, this system on, let's say, some Arduino or any other microcontroller, right, so this is not going to be that well behaved as I have drawn here. Okay, so sometimes because of various issues, right, on, and 50% of which I am myself not aware of, is many of the inaccuracies come in the system because of many design, like issues, artifacts, or even if there is a small change in temperature, there could be certain fluctuations in the frequency of the CPU clock, right, which is going to change the time tick or the slot width of the time tick. So in reality you might get something like this. Okay, sometimes it could be a little bit fast, sometimes it is going to be a little bit slow, and whatever I have drawn is a little bit exaggerated, right? It's not going to be something that this bad, right? But it is definitely not going to follow the line that I have drawn, right, the red line. Okay, so within even a small period of time there are a significant clock drift. So whatever delta clock we are taking during the first part of the protocol is not going to hold good in the second part, where the receiver is now going to send the value back to the packet back to the transmitter. Okay, so simply we have striked off this delta clock is not going to be a very good decision. Okay, so see, you can always do something which we did in the very first time, right? We can do something like this, right? T receive minus T send, and what you are going to have is an inaccurate value of your time of flight. So next time we can do this, right? This is also going to work. You are just going to have an inaccurate value of time of flight, and every time we are trying to the attempt to increase the accuracy of the time of flight. I'm not saying that these things are not going to work, but it's just going to introduce a lot of inaccuracy, which is going to make the system infeasible or impossible to use for a given application. Let's say the application of robotics I told you, where it has to move the arms, and you just need to make sure that it is correct within a few millimeters. Okay, so in those cases we have to make the system highly sophisticated, and the exercise I am trying to go through now is trying to give you an idea is how to make the systems as accurate as possible. Okay, so because it's up to us, it's up to the protocol, we are not spending more money to make it more accurate, right? It's just trying to design a protocol that is going to make it more accurate. Okay, so now instead of just taking the value of T1 as T1, we are trying to use this value called true T1. Okay, what is the value of true T1? And there we are assigning these clock drifts with these two devices. One is delta A and the other one is the delta B. Okay, so true T1 is T1 multiplied by 1 plus delta A, and true T2 is T2 multiplied by 1 plus delta B. Okay, so now here basically we have to follow how we are developing this algebraic analysis, right? This is a little bit the analysis might be a little bit boring, but you have to see how we are orchestrating the packet exchanges in order to remove our dependency on all this kind of things which we cannot control. Okay, so simply we have replaced these values. We have the same equation as we had earlier. So this is the same equation. This is the same equation. It's just that we have replaced the value of t1 by t1 into 1 plus delta a, and t2 by 1 plus delta b, and t4 is again on the this side of the transmitter. So this is delta a still holds, and t3 is on the side of the receiver, so delta b still holds. Okay, so now this is the expression. So t2 minus t1 comes out nicely, t4 minus t3 comes out nicely, and we are now left with these two terms, right, which has this value delta a and delta b in it. Okay, so now we are again reiterating the same algebraic expression, the same thing that I wrote last time. So these are the terms that are devoid of delta b and delta a, and these are the terms where we still have these terms delta b and delta a, and we are going to look at what we can do. Okay, so now we just group the terms in a different way. So we bring t3 delta b from here to here, right, and take, right. So note that delta a is representing one device, that is the transmitter device, and delta b is representing the receiver device, the drift in the receiver device. Okay, so now we can have the expression like this, where t2 minus t3 into delta b plus delta a into t4 minus t1. Okay, so this is our expression here. So this is what we have till now. Okay, so please keep this in mind, and we are going to extend our analysis to look at some other aspects of this expression, right, or what are the problems with this expression, right? It's still dependent on the value of delta b and delta a directly. Okay, so now what we do is we simply replace t4 minus t1, which is basically the time that is spent from t4 to t1, this thing, as t3 minus t2. So this is something that you will need. Row that goes here, and so how much is this? This is nothing but t3 minus t2. So that is exactly what I have written. Okay, so t4 minus t1 would be equal to t3 minus t2 plus 2 into rho. Now let's expand the thing more. So now what we have is delta a minus delta b into t3 minus t2 plus delta a into rho. Okay, and this one is very small. Okay, so rho is basically the time of flight, right, and this is a very small quantity, and that multiplied by the drift, this is something we can safely ignore, right? So there's a multiplication sign in between them. Okay, this is a very small quantity. So now what we are left with is delta a minus delta b into t3 minus t2. Okay, so this is our expression. Okay, so what is your observation here? Here we are trying to see that it depends on the difference of this clock drift, right? Delta I is the clock drift on the first device, and delta b is the clock drift on the second device. So this basically gives you the offset, right? How much is one device ahead or behind the other device, multiplied by t3 minus t2. Okay, so from this expression, what do you think is a possible savior for us in order to get a correct value of rho? Like, what is the strategy we can take? see what should be the value of T3 minus T2 ideally in order to get rid of any dependencies of delta N and delta B. How much this should be?
0.
0, right? So what is T3 minus T2? T3 minus T2 is a processing time. If you see on the other side, the receiver side, T3 minus T2 is nothing but the processing time it took for receiving the packet and then sending it back. So if we receive the packet and send it out immediately out, so T3 minus T2 will be a very small number and it will be close to 0. This is the processing time. Okay, but this might not be something in our control, right? So the radio will receive and decode the packet, and there is a process that we need to follow. Okay, so if it is system that has some level of kernel that is actually operating, right? So there is some latency that will be introduced there also, right? And even if it is a simple microcontroller radio based thing, there will be some hardware delay. So this is something that is out of our control. It is not something that we can rely on. The protocol cannot rely on the underlying hardware, right? Somebody is going to run the protocol on a very low end system, it's not going to work there, right? Why? Because this T3 minus T2 is large, and we cannot simply complain that okay, your device is crappy, so you cannot range. Okay, and the error can be quite large. We cannot really make it we cannot really depend on this. Okay, so we have to do something smarter at this point in time. Okay, so I hope this is clear till now, the story. Okay, so we have just simply started with sending one packet. Now we have sent the packet and then resent it, right? So it went from transmitter to receiver, spent some time there, and then from receiver to transmitter back again. So what we do is add one more transmission. Okay, so this is still the same thing. T1 goes and registers the timestamp T2, sends out at T3, comes back at T4. It was till now we had the same thing. Now there is one more transmission. What? It is sending at T5 and being received at T6. Okay, I just added one more transmission, and now try to analyze what is going to happen here. Okay, so now what is the rho? This is your value of time of flight is RA minus dB. So notice this very carefully. Let me rub this red colors. Okay, so this is RA. RA is this thing, right? T4 minus T1. So when you do RA minus dB is this part. Okay, so this is gone. So there is one row here and one row here. And then what do you do? RB minus DA. So this entire thing is RB, and you take out this DA from here. So as you know, there is like one row here repeated, and there is one more row here. So that is why we are dividing this by 4. So RA minus dB, that strips out like 2 row worth of time, and RB minus DA is again 2 row worth of time. So total you will have 4 rows, so divided by 4. Okay, and we do the same business here also. We just make sure that we multiply this thing with the value of clock drift. So RA multiplied by 1 plus delta A and so on, right? We just rewrite the expression in the way we were doing it earlier. Okay, and now we rearrange them, right? We are basically trying to put all these delta related terms on one side. This is simply algebraic rearrangement that you can try out after the class, right? Because all these things will be there with you. Okay, so one thing that we are doing is that RA here, okay, is sort of expanded in this form. Okay, so we are trying to write RA in terms of this dB and 2 row, right? Because you can simply see why. So this is RA. Okay, so this is the same trick we have done earlier also. So this is equal to dB, right? And then there is one row here and another row here, right? So this is dB plus 2 into rho. So simply we are writing the expanded form. Okay, so now we have delta A here, dB, 2 rho into delta A minus dA into delta A. So this is the same thing that goes here. Plus this part is again expanded here. Okay. So RB in a very similar way is written as dA delta B plus 2 rho into delta A minus this. Again, with some algebraic manipulation and arrangements, this becomes delta A minus delta B into dB minus dA. Okay. So earlier, if you remember, there was this processing time T3 minus T2, right? And somebody said that it has to be close to 0. So what is your observation here about dB minus dA? So let me go back to the figure, trying to understand what is dB minus dA. So this is the figure we have. Okay, now we see it is we are kind of done with all the parts, right? It's just that we have one more dependency like this, like delta A minus delta B multiplied by dB minus dA. Okay, can we bring this dB minus dA under our control?
Yes.
What is this?
The processing delay between two.
No, that was T3 minus T2. So dB is a processing delay, dA is a processing delay, dB minus dA is the difference in
the
processing
difference
delay.
between processing delays. Yes. So we can make it.
So
Yeah,
it
we
could
can-
be somewhat within our control, because we can like these are the same kind of an IoT system trying to range with another IoT system, and we have to make sure that the protocol that is running in one of them, it is of course going to be the same protocol going to run on other one, and the instructions that you give when you receive a packet is exactly the same. You don't ask the other guy to do more work, right? So that we can restrict the difference in processing delay to a very small quantity. There will be some uncertainty, but that is much better than what we had last time, right? Having T proportional to the processing time itself. Okay, so now it is not proportional to the processing time, it is proportional to the difference in processing time. Okay, so this is much smarter compared to what we had one iteration back. Okay, so so this is the final expression. All of these things are things that are actually measured on the IoT device, and this is the small part, right? If we try to make sure that dB and dA are sort of same, you don't have a lot of asymmetric kind of a operation that you do on these two devices. Whatever you do in the first device, you do the second device also, then it is going to save you from introducing a lot of error. Okay, and now from a few meters, this kind of operation is going to reduce your error to a few centimeters. So this is where we comes the name symmetric two-way ranging. Two-way because we are doing it both ways, from A to B and B to A, number one. And number two is it's not asymmetric, it's symmetric because we are trying to have the overhead of processing symmetrically distributed among these two components A and B, among these two devices A and B. That's where the symmetric thing comes. And this is a very, very standard protocol for doing ranging. Okay, so most of it we were trying to solve a puzzle, right? We did not introduce any more hardware with higher capability or anything, right? But instead of doing something like T receive minus T send multiplied by speed of light, which can give you an arbitrarily large error, right? How much you try, right? We try to know how to design a systematic way in order to do the synchronization without any third party. So we are only doing the synchronization among ourselves by sending packets and talking to each other. Okay, so this is further enhanced by industrial standards, and I'm not going to go to that level. Right, there are even patents on many patents actually on how to get the correct value of TOF under different restrictions. So we are not really bothered about like a sub-millimeter kind of thing. So people who are into like robotic startup kind of things, they are like really interested in doing something which is less than a millimeter. But for most applications, centimeter suffices. Okay. So this is where we will stop regarding how much we want to do regarding ranging and time of flight estimation. Okay, and this is a real example. As I told you, instead of Wi-Fi, if we use things like ultra wideband, which has like gigahertz wide bandwidth, the clock operates at 15.6 picoseconds, right? The clock they have in the radio, right? Which you can very easily see that this what is the error that you can make here is that this multiplied by speed of light. Okay, so this is approximately going to be a little bit lesser than 5 millimeters. Okay, so fundamentally in your channel impulse response, all the different paths that we are having, right? So the resolution in this case is something like 15.6 picosecond. So if you mistake this one, right, let's say this was your fast path and you took this one, you will only be off by 4.7 millimeters. Okay, and if you are off by 2 or 3 such spikes, right, you will be, let's say 10 such spikes, you will be off by 47 millimeters. Okay, so this is a very granular system that is offered by ultra wideband because of the higher bandwidth it has. Okay, and this is some a real system that actually uses it, right? If you happen to go to New York City, they have the subway system where they have this anti-collision instrumentation in between multiple trains, right? So in this real-time system can always show you that what is the distance in between the two trains when they are approaching each other. Okay, they do use this ultra wideband technology, and this is very reliable, and this is a technology that is that is also going on in the recent generation of Apple iPhones, right? To have the smart tagging of different devices, right? You will often hear that many devices they will put tags, right, on your wallet, on your smartphone, and so on. And just using your mobile phone, you can figure them out where they are, and they require precise ranging. Okay, and like Apple and some other companies also showed interest in deploying this technology. So this was sort of proposed as a communication technology earlier, and now this is more used for sensing purposes. Okay, so this is what I had to tell you about ranging today. So next class we are going to see what other techniques exist by using these ranges.